this isn't really a conflict, a direct conflict between Russia and the West. That's how Putin wants to frame it to justify what he's doing, right? This is about Russia engaging in perhaps a sort of a neo-imperialist attack on a smaller neighbor, attempting to wipe out its identity, its independence, its sovereignty. And the Ukrainian people, first and foremost, have demonstrated incredible bravery over the past year in the face of this aggression.
We've seen China's top diplomat has been in Moscow, and Vladimir Putin has now said that Xi Jinping is going to go to Russia as well. What do you make of that as a development, and what message do you think they try to send by showing this closeness of the relationship? It's such a sensitive time as we approach the first anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Right. Well, look, we've long been following closely the so-called no limits partnership that the PRC and Russia agreed to since last year. And we've continued to be very frank and direct with the PRC, privately and publicly, our concerns over any potential PRC support for Russia as it continues to prosecute this illegal, unprovoked, and unjustified further invasion of Ukraine. As the Secretary said on Sunday, and as we've said in other engagements as well, we do have indications that the PRC is considering providing lethal military assistance to Russia. And we've been clear to them in private conversations that doing so would have a very negative effect on the bilateral relationship between our two countries, and it would have severe consequences. So we're going to continue to maintain open lines of communication with the PRC on this and other issues to ensure that we can responsibly manage our competition between our two countries, and to ensure that Russia is not getting support to further fuel this horrific tragedy that's happening in Ukraine right now.
What would those consequences look like? Because clearly at the moment, there's sort of almost global united opposition to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Is very, and the both military and economic responses of that have all been aimed at Russia. But what would those consequences look like were China to cross that line?
So unfortunately, I'm just not going to be able to get into that, certainly not publicly. But we've been communicating very clearly with the PRC privately what we would do. And look, ultimately, this is a matter in which we've been very clear that the world needs to stand united with Ukraine, right? The world needs to continue to ensure that Russia continues to pay a diplomatic price. And we've seen Russia isolated as a result of its actions, right? At the most recent United Nations General Assembly vote condemning Russia's annexation of certain parts of Ukraine, we saw over 143 countries vote in favor of that resolution, and only 4 countries voted with Russia. So Russia is paying a diplomatic price. It's increasingly isolated, and it will continue to be isolated as long as Putin continues this pointless war.
In fact, you just used the word pointless. Some people are looking at what the UN's response has been, the United Nations response has been. The fact that Russia is one of the permanent members on the Security Council, to the outside world, this can look a bit like an organization incapable of reacting to precisely the sort of event that the UN was born out of. Do you have concerns about that, about Russia's position on the Security Council?
Well, look, we've been clear that Russia's use of the veto with the United Nations Security Council is, in fact, irresponsible. And we've been clear that the use of the veto should be something that's done sparingly and should never, of course, be done in a way that undermines the UN Charter, right? The UN Charter, of course, is part of this sort of architecture of rules that we set up after World War II to ensure that wars like that never happen again. And Russia's attempt to change the borders of Europe by force is a clear violation of that UN Charter. And so we've, continued to stand with allies and partners around the world to ensure that there is a cost for that behavior. And we will continue to take that case to the United Nations. Secretary Blinken is actually heading there at the end of this week. He'll give remarks at the UN Security Council on Friday, and we'll continue to make that case multilaterally and in any form where we can to continue to push back on this, again, further invasion of Ukraine.
Our former Prime Minister here, Liz Truss, said recently that sanctions should be prepared to defend against what she called the rise of a totalitarian China. She added the free world is in danger from China. Does America agree that the world is in danger from China?
Well, we certainly have a differing view on the PR. We differ in our terms of our view of the world and the international order with the PRC. The PRC has a very different vision of the world, right? And so we want to uphold a rules-based international order, the same order that I spoke about that was established post World War II, that really lays out the rules of the road for international relations. And the PRC clearly has a disruptive vision, a different vision, and that's why we want to continue to manage this competition that we have with the PRC, to impose guardrails on that competition to ensure that it doesn't veer into conflict. Now, that's not to say that we're going to be in competition with the PRC on everything. There are actually areas where we do want to see cooperation with the PRC if our interests align. For example, climate change, right? For example, combating the flow of narcotics around the world, right? But that can happen only if we continue to ensure that we are competing vigorously with the PRC where their actions are clearly irresponsible, and we are aligning closely with allies and partners around the world, including the UK, on a strategy for upholding the rules-based international order.
I want to ask you about the nuclear treaty that President Putin withdrew from this week. It was the last one. It's the last remaining nuclear arms deal between Russia and the US. Does America feel that the world is less safe today as a result of that?
Well, certainly Russia's decision was deeply unfortunate and irresponsible. And we're going to continue to watch what Russia actually does on the ground, what its actual actions are in this case. We believe that the New START Treaty is a vital part of the international architecture of nonproliferation. We believe that's why we renewed it and extended it at the beginning of this current administration, the Biden administration. And we're going to continue to abide by our obligations under international law. Again, this was a deeply unfortunate and irresponsible decision on the part of Russia.
We've heard obviously a lot from Vladimir Putin this week. He talks about, whenever he feels like his back's against the wall, he starts talking about nuclear weapons. He's also said it would be impossible for Western-backed Ukrainian forces to defeat his country on the battlefield. Do you think he's right about that? Is it impossible for the West to defeat his troops in Ukraine?
Well, let's be clear about this, right? This isn't really a direct conflict between Russia and the West. That's how Putin wants to frame it to justify what he's doing, right? This is about Russia engaging in perhaps a sort of a neo-imperialist attack on a smaller neighbor, attempting to wipe out its identity, its independence, its sovereignty. And the Ukrainian people, first and foremost, have demonstrated incredible bravery over the past year in the face of this aggression, right? First and foremost, we have to give them credit for the ingenuity, for the resilience, for the creativity they've shown in pushing back on what Russia is doing in Ukraine. Putin thought that he could roll through Kiev easily, and that clearly was not the case. And of course, the Western Alliance, the United States, the United Kingdom, and its allies provided an unprecedented amount of security assistance to Ukraine to ensure that it can prevail. And so in the early phases of this war, you saw us provide javelins and anti-armor weapons to help Ukraine win the battle for Kiev. Later on, as the nature of the battle shifted, we provided anti-air systems, we provided anti-drone systems to help Ukraine protect its civilian infrastructure. And most recently, we've been providing armored vehicles, including Bradley fighting vehicles and other armored vehicles as well, in order to ensure that Ukraine can continue to press forward and consolidate its gains, right? Russia, on the other hand, is in a very desperate situation, right? They are so desperate. They've taken so many losses over the course of the past year that they've turned to recruiting convicts in prisons, right, to fight in their war. They've turned to countries like the DPRK and Iran to get material. And that's because of the incredible costs that we've imposed on Russia economically. And Russia will continue to, I think, be in a weaker and weaker position militarily. And we're going to ensure that when a negotiating table does emerge, that Ukraine will be in that best possible position in future negotiations.
Just finally on that point about you sending equipment, our former Prime Ministers, both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, have called on the UK government to send fighter jets to Ukraine. Is that something that President Biden's administration, that America would support?
So we're in constant contact with the Ukrainians as to what they need to continue to prosecute the war and defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity. And those conversations are ongoing We are not going to preview any specific weapon systems, and frankly, it's not really particularly useful to focus or fixate on particular weapon systems. What we really need to focus on is the broader strategic picture of how effectively are we standing with Ukraine economically, militarily, providing humanitarian assistance, et cetera, in order to ensure that it can defend itself and result in an outcome in which we have a democratic, independent, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine. That's everyone's goal here, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Nathaniel Tech, Deputy Spokesperson from the US Department of State. Thanks very much for joining us on Times Radio.
Thank you.